doesn't speak that much. He does speak to Joseph through dreams, also to Pharaoh. But in reality, God is kind of in the background watching these guys go. And so we're in Genesis 37 we're going to begin in today. And my main point today is going to be dysfunction unchecked leads to disaster unleashed. Dysfunction unchecked leads to disaster unleashed. We have a problem in this country. Okay, we have a list. Okay, but I mean, one of the problems in the country is confrontation, discussion, just having a disagreement. Oh my goodness. I don't know where we went wrong, but it used to be fun to have great debates. Amen? I don't know what they're teaching them in the school, but they used to have debate clubs to teach you how to debate people. And somehow, people turned words. If you remember, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. But now they've been weaponized, I guess. And so when we have dysfunction, many times we just let it go, whether it's in our family, our workplace, our friendships, because we don't want that confrontation. But if we don't check it, it becomes a disaster. And the next thing you know, we're more divided than ever before. So this journey through the life of Joseph includes so much stuff. It's so great. It's got vice and drama and seduction and prison and revenge, rags to riches, then back to rags and back to riches. We got famine. We got almost everything except for a good car chase in this story. We got reconciliation. We got restoration. I mean, Hollywood should be making movies better like this. And I want to cue you up for what this study of Joseph's life can teach us. Beginning today, right out of the gate, we're going to see this disastrous result when this dysfunction goes unchecked. When things like pride, passivity, jealousy, deceit, resentment, immaturity, naivety, they're left unchecked. There's trouble, trauma, broken results, broken relationships as a result. Then you contrast with that trouble and heartache with sweet grace. And that results in Joseph's refuses revenge, instead offers forgiveness and restoration. Throughout this series, though he starts a bit naive and foolish, we have to remember he's only 17 in the beginning of the story. We'll see Joseph model enormous integrity, remarkable resilience, and gracious forgiveness. I always pictured Timothy, they believe to be, the disciple Timothy to be somewhere between 17 and 19. And you got to think he must have read the story of Joseph a few times. God, how did he do this? Pastor Timothy, I could just see Paul, go back into Genesis. Go read the Pentateuch again. Go read about Joseph. God is, like I said, mostly behind the scenes. We're going to see God's providential fingertips on it. We will. And we'll see his care through it, but there's very little mention, actually, of God explicitly until the end. And though he's not stage front, he is clearly working out his plan through his people. God enables suffering, but he enables it so it can be purposeful. This series will blow apart any false notion that Christ's followers should not suffer. No one is eager to suffer. No one should be. But neither should we think that we shouldn't have any sufferings. Don't ever lead someone to Christ and tell them, now that you have Jesus, everything is great. He'll get us through anything, but that doesn't mean the storms won't be there. There's a subtle notion that God only allows us to suffer if we're doing something wrong. I used to believe that. I used to believe that all the time. Man, I'm going through such hell. What am I doing wrong, God? What am I doing wrong? But Joseph's life is going to show us that suffering happens. And God is always there, sovereignly, redemptively, all through it. And we'll learn that through it, he does doesn't cause the pain. God does not cause the suffering, but God is sovereign over suffering. And he's able to redeem it, to use it for our good, for the good in our lives, the good in the lives of others. And that's the beauty of God's redemptive power. There's nothing better than going through a tough time and knowing God is still on the throne. God is in control. God still loves you. And you can have peace no matter what you're going through. Amen? Amen? Come on, you with me today? No matter what you go through, remember this. It's not wasted. No matter what you go through, whatever suffering you deal with, it's not lost. And it's not useless. God is constructive when evil is destructive. Ooh, that's a good word, Pastor. You should say that again. I believe I will. God is constructive when evil is destructive. And this is captured by Joseph's summary comment to his brothers at the end of the ordeal when he says in Genesis 50, he says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." I'll be in the New King James. That's the translation I'm going to be in. But that's really going to be our theme verse throughout this entire story of Joseph's life. In other words, if we will trust through trials, God will take what was meant for destructive work and bring redemption and bring constructive results. Every one of us has experienced some level of suffering. And we struggle, and God will sovereignly redeem all of those who trust him. No matter what you go through, he will redeem it one day. If you think about this, all the turmoil that your body has gone through, there will be one day when it's the last time you're going to be sick. I mean that in a good way. I don't mean that in a tragic or frightening way. There will be one day when all that pain is gone. Amen. So this story about Joseph's life is set in context of his father Jacob, who is also referred to as Israel, the name given to him when he had that wrestling match with God. And to understand Joseph, you have to kind of look at the sense of his dad, Jake. You have to look at Jacob. Because Jacob was not a model father or a perfect man. He had 13 children. 6 sons and 1 daughter were born from Leah, the wife, Laban, who tricked him into marrying Jacob, also married his sister Rachel, who was actually Jacob's first and most favorite heartthrob. Many of you know the story of Leah and Rachel. She had been barren, but eventually God opened up her womb, and she had Joseph and then later Benjamin. Jacob also had 4 other sons from his handmaidens, Baliah and Zilpah. Jacob appears to have been, though, a very passive father. Many of us grew up in homes of passive fathers. And that's mostly because of generational things. A lot of fathers grew up during the war, especially, or the Depression. And the main job of the dad, go out and earn some money, baby. And so many of them were raised in thinking, I love my family so much I will sacrifice anything to provide for them. And unfortunately, many kids grow up thinking, well, dad's not there, dad's so cold, he just comes home and he's tired, and I don't get to spend a lot of time with my dad because he's always working. I don't think my dad really loved me. When in fact, dad was out there doing all this work and all this time away because he loves them. And it creates friction within the family. And so Jacob, when we look at his life, his job isn't so overwhelming. His life is not so overwhelming, but he makes decisions pretty passively. I would say he was either fearful or a people pleaser. Nothing worse than a leader who's a people pleaser. You'll see it in our politicians many times. They change their opinions because of the polls instead of doing what they feel is right. Whether we agree with it right or wrong, a principled person doesn't change their mind because of popularity contest. And Jacob had one and only daughter. And you think of it, one and only daughter, Dinah, and she was raped. And when Jacob learned of it, he did nothing. Her brothers, however, retaliated and took revenge on this guy, wiping out him and all of his family. And Jacob said nothing about that. In fact, the only thing he seemed to be concerned about was managing his appearance in the public eye. So maybe he would have made a good politician. Later, after Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin, Jacob's firstborn, Reuben, had sex with Jacob's handmaiden, who was the mother of two of his half-brothers. Again, Jacob did nothing. No discipline, no nothing. This family is definitely not the Cleavers. Dated myself right there. Joseph's family was riddled with deception, intrigue, anger, rebellion, rivalry, out-of-control jealousy, and plenty of dysfunction to go around for everybody. So let's jump into the opening scene. This is the 52 slides we have here of Genesis chapter 37, verse 1. I'm in the New King James. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhan and the sons of Zilpah and his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report to them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all of his other children, because he was the son of his old age. But also he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to them. Some translations said they never had a good word for him. So we look at this robe, and we've seen it on TV and cartoons and musicals, the robe of many colors, that there's a lot of confusion about that robe. It wasn't the colors that was so fantastic about it. It wasn't the colors that had any massive significance to it. In fact, the coat was designed for an overseer and not a worker. And we know that because it was a long robe with long sleeves. And typically, the workers had a shorter robe because they didn't want to get it caught on anything. And it usually didn't have any sleeves at all. So they were free to go about their work. So this robe that they give Joseph, the many colors, is really about the function of an overseer. So they weren't jealous. The brothers weren't looking, oh, look at the pretty robe. No. They were frustrated that it was a robe they knew he could do no work in. They knew it. And by giving this coat to Joseph, Jacob indicated that Joseph had privilege in his position, prominence in the family business. And it seems Jacob gave this coat in part, at least because of his character, Joseph's temperament. Because typically this honor would have been shown to the eldest or to the youngest for birth order reasons. But what was clear is that it was next to impossible to do the hard shepherding work in this garment. So it would be like a welder showing up to a construction site in a mink coat. Same exact thing. In Joseph's day, work garb consisted of these short sleeves, and they could move around easily. But by giving Joseph this, he says, you can wear this beautiful garment because you don't have to work like your brothers. He's showing this in favoritism right in front of his brothers. And for 17 years, Joseph's brothers watched as Jacob played favorites with Joseph. And as you can imagine, this led to tons of jealousy, resentment, hatred. I mean, the family was really a powder keg because of this. In fact, at the end of verse 4, like it said, they couldn't even find a kind word. They couldn't speak even peacefully to him. Now, if Jacob loaded the powder keg with his unwise favoritism, Joseph lit the fuse with his unwise broadcasting of his dreams. It says this in verse 5, Joseph had had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There were binding sheaves in the field. And then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed your sheaves stood up all round. And they bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream. And he told it to his brothers and said, look, I've dreamed another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told this to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. What in the world is Joseph thinking? He knows they don't like him. So when I go to do any kind of sermon on any kind of topic, I try to look for other things, other sources, just to kind of give me a different context, different look to it. And there was a good old movie called Joseph, and it was had like Ben Kingsley in it and a few others. Martin Landau was in it. It was a good movie. And they portrayed Joseph a little differently. I always looked at Joseph as going, hey guys, check out my dream. You're all going to bow down. And Dad, my next dream, you're going to bow down too. That's how I always pictured it, like Joseph was an idiot. Like, what are you doing? You're prideful. He's got his coat, which kind of makes sense. I mean, I could get that. He's got his coat, and now it's been confirmed by my dreams. But in the movie I was watching, I kind of like their take on it, that Joe was naive, that he was confused. Who's he going to talk to? He's going to go to his older brothers. He had this dream last night. I mean, if you look at it, he doesn't tell them what the dream meant. They told him. He tells them the dream, and then they say, oh, are we going to bow down to you? They're actually giving the interpretation, not him. And then when he has a second dream, Jacob, he gives the interpretation. Oh, are we all going to bow down to these stars? Is it you? So I don't know. Was Joseph being boastful, prideful? He was not being wise. That much I know. Was he being naive? I don't know. Was he innocent in this or prideful? And I think the story works both attitudes. I like the innocent one myself because I look at the way Joseph is a type of Christ, and it's kind of consistent with what happened to Joseph through it. But I just always wondered, did he understand his humility, lack of humility, or was he deluded by the grandeur? Either way, it had to be difficult to handle the implication of these dreams. It seemed that Joseph isn't concerned about how this is all going to sound to his brothers. I mean, I don't know how I could just say, hey guys, I had this great dream. You're all going to bow down. Bah! I don't know. Maybe he was passive aggressive. Hey guys, I had this dream. I don't know what it meant. What do you think? I could have been a lot. And either way, the face of this behavior by Joseph and his brother, once again, Jacob barely reacts. He pushes back a little bit, but he says nothing to the jealous brothers. And that's important because passivity as a parent in the face of reckless responses and inappropriate behavior is deadly. Let me break it very simply down to this. What you permit, you promote. What you permit, you promote. And look, I know many of us have older children now. They're grown and we got grandkids and stuff. But how many know just because they're 30s or 40s and got those kids, you're not done parenting? Amen? So when we look at these things that we permit in our homes, when the things we permit in their lives, we have to remember you're promoting those things in their lives. I remember when I was growing up, there were lots of parents that would let their kids have big parties at their houses with alcohol and such and everything else. And they were doing it because, listen, I'd rather have I know they're going to go out and drink, so I want them to be here where I can control it and be safe and not let anybody drive home. That's why we're doing it. And I used to think to myself, okay, what are you making sure any of these kids are alcoholics? Are you making sure the parents all know that you're allowing their kid to drink in your house? God forbid someone dies of alcohol poisoning. You're going to be responsible for that? Oh, wait a minute. I thought it was the government said 21, but I guess you're smarter. Why don't you give your 10-year-old the keys to your car also? I used to do that to my kids all the time, drove them nuts when they were little. Remember when kids would do this when they were little? They go, you don't trust me because you don't trust me with anything. You don't trust me. I said, I trust you. And said, no, you don't trust me. And I would hand them the keys to my car. They'd be like 11. Here are the keys to my car. Go out, and I want you to go get some milk and some eggs. And oh, Dad, I can't go out there and drive. Why? Because they don't know how to drive. Oh, and the government says you're not allowed to drive to 16. Duh, Dad. And I go, oh, so it's okay not to trust you in some things and to trust you in other things. Drove them nuts. I was a very exasperating father. But this is where Jacob is not rebuking, and he's permitting this to continue to go on in the battle with the brothers. He's ignoring the dysfunction. Jacob's ignoring the destructive emotions. These things had to be dealt with and processed. Otherwise, it's going to erupt, and we all know what happens. Genesis chapter 37, verse 12, it says, Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers feeding the flock of Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them. So he said to him, Here I am. And then he said to him, Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks. And bring back word to me. So he sent him out to the valley of Hebron and went to Shechem. So go check on your brothers. Obviously, Jacob is not trusting them or paying attention, so he sends Joseph. Now, obviously, Joseph either got lost or the boys moved somewhere else. So he says, a certain man found him, and there he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, What are you seeking? He said, I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding his flocks. And the man said, They have departed from here, for I heard them say, Let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Now, I kind of like the idea in that movie I was watching that this man was an angel. So they had moved on, and Joseph had no idea where they were, and all of a sudden here's this guy who says, oh, they went over to Dothan. And that's where he goes. I just don't understand why it's even in there, to be honest with you. Why couldn't it just go, I'm seeking, before he even sees that. Now, he says, I'll bring him back a word. So he sent them out to the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. But why doesn't it just say, but they wasn't in Shechem, and he found him in Dothan? No, instead we get this whole story of this dude. So I don't know. I kind of like the idea it might be an angel. I don't know. So it doesn't really say it. So he found him, and then the brothers saw him afar off. Even before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. And they said to one another, Look, the dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into a pit. Now, I've heard of little brothers getting picked on by older brothers. This is taking a little too far for me. And we shall say, some wild beast devoured him, Dad. I don't know what happened. We shall see what will become of his dreams. But Reuben heard it and delivered him out of their hands and said, No, let us not kill him. It's a great discussion, isn't it? No, let's not kill him. Reuben said, Shed no blood, but cast him into a pit, which is in the wilderness, and don't lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to their father. So Reuben's plan is, look, we won't lay a hand on him, we'll just drop him in the pit, and then Reuben's thinking, I'll come back later and go get him. So it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers, and they stripped him of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him, and then they took him and cast him into the pit. And the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. I just can't imagine. They're sitting. You can imagine Joseph going, Guys, come on. Be quiet, we're eating. They're leaving him in a pit and they're having a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. And with their camels bearing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill the brother and conceal his blood? Come and let's send him to the Ishmaelites. And let not our hands be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And the brothers listened. And the Midianite traders passed by, and so the brothers pulled Joseph up, lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. 20 shekels doesn't sound like that much, but in those days that was enough to feed a small family for several months. So I'm not giving Reuben that much credit. I mean, Reuben didn't want to kill him, but he wanted to make a buck. And then Reuben returned to the pit. Indeed, Joseph was not in this period. Reuben did not sell him, but Reuben came back. And he was in this, and he tore his clothes, and he returned to his brother and said, the lad is no more. Where shall I go? So Reuben's freaking out. So they took Joseph's tunic, killed the kid of a goat, and dipped the tunic in blood. So you can see Reuben's panic now. We've lost him. I was going to go back and get him. He didn't know the brothers were going to sell him. He gets all freaked out. We got to cover this thing up. Remember Jacob when he was born? The name means schemer. These guys are following in the family line. They're figuring out a way to cover this whole thing up. He says, then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, so they've dipped the tunic in blood. They now come to their dad, and they do this. Oh, Dad, we found this. Do you know if this is your son's? I mean, come on. They're really playing it big. It says, and he recognized it. Jacob recognized it and said, it's my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes and put a sackcloth on his waist. And he mourned for his son many days. And all of his sons and all of his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, for I shall go down to the grave and my son in mourning. Thus his father wept for him. And now the Midianites sold him to Egypt, sold him, Joseph in Egypt, to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. So here we are. The brothers see Joe coming. They take care of business. They seem to be showing some scruples by not killing him, but then they realize they can make a buck, and now they got to cover their tracks. And that's so funny when they go to Jake and they say, hey, see, this is our brother's robe. So they had no loss of this deception, no guilt. In fact, they don't even mind adding another deception onto it. And here's the principle to live by. We just said it. Dysfunction unchecked leads to disaster unleashed. This is the theme. This is the opening of Joseph's life. Lessons learned from unchecked devotion leading to unchecked, unleashed revenge. And this passivity is a problem. The implicit in the background of these opening scenes are the consequences of a father's passivity and, more important, inconsistency. We as parents and grandparents have got to be consistent. We're probably, some of you, and I've talked to several of you about this, are the only consistent thing in your family's life. I came to Jesus because just for one reason. My grandmother was the only consistent person in my entire family. The consistency is so important. Passive parents are too often distracted. They're too tired to invest the time. They don't want to confront. They don't want to guide. They don't want to instruct. Or how about this? They warn and they warn and they warn and they never break through. They never follow through with it. Drives me nuts. You know what really I drove my kids nuts with this. I told you, believe me, you'll know why they all have degrees in psychology. I'm telling you, it drove them nuts. You know that when you see parents do this, I am going to count to 3. And they do that. 1, 2, 2.5. You know what I used to do? Kids, I am going to count to 1. And if you are not right here, you're in trouble. 1. Why am I going to wait till 3? That's when they're going to wait. And I always do this thing, right here, not over there, here, and you look at me, counting to 1. That was when I was really throwing daddy tantrums. Or you see the other way. Parents feel like they're going to explain life to their child. Honey, there's a truck coming and you're standing in the middle of the road. Now, here's why it's important for you to move. I mean, give me a break. Just get your butt over here before I smack it. How about that? Sometimes passivity ignores. Passivity overlooks. It can avoid for a while, but usually when the passive parent finally takes action, then they bring the hammer down and the kid has no clue of what's going on. They were getting away with it, and suddenly the children are not disciplined, they are wounded now. That type of parenting is ineffective, it's counterproductive. And I know it's so hard these days, the challenges for parents. And I know things are more complex. And the days are going to get increasingly challenging. And they'll get more stressful. But this is where it's so important to learn the second lesson that we can pull this, is showing favoritism is never fruitful. Showing favoritism, and sometimes we do it and we don't know we're doing it. Human development research reveals that parents are more likely to show favoritism in subtle ways, more than obvious material ways. And the predominant reason given for favoritism are the kid's intellect, the behavior, the birth order, the creativity, rather than his or her physical appearance or gender. It's a natural thing. It's a natural when this happens, when the youngest child in the family, the baby. Parents in our culture have more to share with their younger children materially. And sometimes without realizing it, we can inadvertently show favoritism to younger kids because they're the last child to leave the home. Or just because you now have more resources later in life. Or you have less fear. You know when it starts? When you you might think this is when the change happened for us. And I'm not saying we favored Rebecca or favored Alicia. But things were just different when you have a second child. My first child, Alicia, was raised in a completely clean, sterile, hyperallergenic atmosphere, barring anything from a hazmat suit. I mean, if you dropped that binky on the floor, it was boiled before you could ever touch it again. Everything had to be spotless, rubbed down, and cleaned perfectly. I remember boiling all the bottles and boiling all the nipples on those things and boiling every binky there ever was, and how the toys had to be frequently washed in hot water and everything, everything. The room was rubbed down and clean. By the time Becca was born, oh, that's Becca's binky right next to that big pile. Oh, you know what? That's all right. Poor Becca. I mean, it's not favoritism. We just respond differently to our second kid. We're less freaked out about everything. And in some ways, we make mistakes with the first one and we correct them with the second. So it's inadvertent sometimes. You don't mean to do it. But the Bible is trying to tell us there are consequences. And that leads to the third lesson. It's the problem of unchecked jealousy. There's a flashpoint of jealousy. If it's left unchecked, unresolved, it grows and it festers and it leads to consequences. If you allow jealousy to germinate in you or your kids or your family, it's only a matter of time and it will manifest itself in a destructive way. One of the key lessons Jesus teaches on the Sermon on the Mount is we have to deal with attitudes as severely as actions. As we lead our personal lives, as we parent and teach and coach, Wrong attitudes have to be confronted. They have to be admonished. The right attitude needs to be praised and rewarded. I used to wake my kids up. If they were grumpy, they had to go back and get their smiles. When they were smarting off in the car, we were driving, we had to sing the attitude song. It was just silly. It was, I got a real good attitude. And they had to go, I have a real good attitude. And they go, ah. And they go, ah. And they go, too. And they go, too. And they go, dude. Just to kind of wake them up and snap them out of it. Because your attitude determines your altitude. It's so important. The other thing is with kids, sometimes you just got to remind them how good they're doing. It's easy to remind them when they're messing up. It's easy to get mad at them because a lot of times it's fear even. When our kids are making bad choices, there's a fear that, oh my God, if they do this, they're going to end up, So we freak out a little bit. But when we make them see good choices, oh man, you know when I blew this? I got more lessons for you out of things I messed up. Alicia was probably I don't even know if Rebecca was, if Becca was born, she was just a baby. And Alicia took some gymnastic classes. And, gymnastics in some places, I don't know if your parents have ever had any dealings with gymnastics. It's a little bit of a racket. Because if they see anything in your kid, they want to pump them up to the next level, which really means more money and more commitment. But see, it's your first kid and you don't know, so you're like, oh my gosh, what if they're like an Olympic star? Oh, we've got to do it. And what we did was we decided it was a pretty big commitment for our young daughter. And we said, okay, we'll commit to this. I don't know, it was like a 2-month program, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And we shelled out the cash. And I remember when it was almost over, it was about a week left, and she said, Daddy, I don't want to do it anymore. And all I did was go, why? Did someone mean to you? Did someone say something wrong to you? Are you quitting because you're tired? Does it hurt? I mean, what's going on? Why? Look, you have to have a better attitude. Don't give up. Don't give up. Don't give up. And I remember telling that to my buddy Mike, who was sitting next to me when I was at the dental lab. And he said, you made this deal with her to finish this 8-week program, right? And I go, yeah. And did you congratulate her on completing the 8 weeks? No. I just hammered her because she wanted to quit. I almost missed it. I called up Debbie, and I was like in a panic. Debbie, Alicia made the 8 weeks, and we did nothing. All we did was rip her because we were afraid she was going to quit for the wrong reasons, but she completed the 8 weeks. And she goes, oh my gosh, we were such bad parents. And we took her out to pizza, and we had a big celebration. Almost missed it. Because we're so quick to criticize. But sometimes, like I said, it's out of fear. And that leads to the last point this morning. No action is more powerful than prayer. No action is more powerful than prayer. Now, as I stated earlier, God is not in the forefront of this narrative, but he's clearly operating in the background. Jacob and Rachel, no doubt, prayed earnestly for their children. They wanted children. And God was gracious to them. And I know the text doesn't say it explicitly, but when Jacob passively grieved what he believed to be Joseph's death, he must have cried out to God in anguish. And remember, Jacob had wrestled with God and lived to tell about it. So surely he was wrestling in prayer now. How else could he have gone on? Where else could he have turned to? And the same is true for you and me. Prayer brings the power to endure. And this is why Jesus implored his followers to pray. This is why Jesus prayed. This is why Jesus prayed passionately and frequently. And he prayed in his greatest hour of need. And this is why other New Testament writers repeatedly encourage us, pray without ceasing. Prayer orientates us. It opens us up to God's attitude, God's activity. It gets us on the outside looking in. It guides us. It gives us His presence, His power. And knowing that we're going to see our loved ones in the morning no matter what happens. I suspect Joseph turned his situation over to God. I could see him in the caravan. Actually, I see him getting out of the pit. Oh, thanks, guys, finally. What do you mean? He was probably happy to get out of the pit, and now he's sold into slavery. Do you think he was in the pit going, God, how much worse can it get? And God went, let me show you. And he sold him. Then he's in being sold into Potiphar. I could see him in that caravan going, God, how much worse could this get? And we're going to hear more in that story. Secondly, he knew even at 17, Joseph, that his only hope would come through God's faithful intervention. Man, if you're ever in a place where the only thing that can change this situation is God, that is a great place to be. Don't you think God wants us in a position first? God, you're the only one who can fix this. God, you're the only one who can walk me through this. God, you're the only one. You're the only one in control of this. God, I turn it over to you. Surely, Joseph cried out. And just as Joseph began to learn to trust through his trials, let us learn to trust through our trials. Someone once told me, Eric, it's good to learn from your mistakes, but it's better to learn from someone else's. This is a great example looking at Jacob as a parent and looking at Joseph, whether he was boastful or naive. We can look at these people and we can go, God, in these situations, only you can intervene. So what is it in your life? What is it in your situation? Is it your health? Is it your emotional health? Is it your financial health? Peace of mind, maybe? Fear? What is it? That only God, only God, only God, only God can intervene. Let's give it to the Lord. Come on, stand in prayer with me this morning. We're going to give it to God right now. God, some of us are dealing with situations that right now we know only you can intervene to make change happen. God, there are those here today that are having health issues, some severe health issues, and the doctors don't know what to do. The medications don't seem to be working. The treatments don't seem to be working. So only you, God. And that's where we turn to today. Sure, we've exhausted our own way of doing it, our own resources, our own thinking and our own knowledge. But God, in the very beginning, we knew only you could intervene. Father, whatever it is that you strike to someone's mind today, that you quicken their spirit, you quicken their mind, and you bring to mind those things that they've been trying to handle on their own, we come again to you and place it at the foot of the cross, and we say, only you, God. Only you can heal this problem. Only you can heal my heart. Only you can heal my body. Only you can heal my finances. Only you can save me. I was walking on water and I took my eyes off of you, God, and now I'm sinking. Only you can save me. And some of us feel like Moses, and we've led people to a place in which there's just an ocean between us and the dry land. But you are the God who parts the seas. There are those of us who've been blind, but now we can see, and now we feel like we're in another situation where we just don't know what the future holds. We can't see it. But God, you are still on the throne and you are still in charge. Oh, Father, our help is in your name. Help us to trust. Increase our faith today, God. As we walk out of here today, increase our faith. Increase our trust. Oh, God,